The Eye Structure and Function Lecture. The objectives of this lecture are to classify sense organs as special or general and explain the basic differences between the two groups, discuss how the stimulus is converted into a sensation, discuss the general sense organs and their function, describe the structure of the eye and the functions and its components, and name and describe the major visual disorders. So general sense organs, which we think of with general sense organs as pain or touch or our sense of temperature, often exist as individual cells or receptor units. They are widely distributed throughout the body. They are very different from special sense organs or groupings of receptors with highly complex organs. They reside in the skin, muscle, tendons, and joints. Special sense organs, they are large and complex organs. There are localized groupings of specialized receptors. Some examples of a large or complex organ would be eyes or nose. Some localized groupings of specialized receptors we think of are smell receptors, taste buds, vision, hearing, and equilibrium. Converting a stimulus into a sensation. All sense organs have common functional characteristics. All are able to detect a particular stimulus. A stimulus is converted into a nerve impulse, and a nerve impulse is perceived as a sensation in the central nervous system. The conduction of action potentials generated in the receptors through the spinal cord to the thalamus, or skin receptors, or the cerebellum, where they synapse, and impulses are then relayed to a specific area of the cerebral cortex for the sensory interpretation. That's how our stimulus work in our body. So general sense receptors, we have quite a few general sense receptors. You can refer to a table in your textbook, 11-1. We have the bulboid corpuscle, which is a receptor for touch and cold. The malar corpuscle is for pressure and high frequency vibrations. Our tactile corpuscle is for fine touch and low frequency vibrations. And then we have another bulbous corpuscle a little bit deeper in the dermal tissue, which is responsible for touch and pressure. The eye, there are several layers to the eye. We have the sclera, which is the outer coat or the white part of the eye. The cornea is the transparent thin membrane that covers the sclera and the iris. The choroid is a pigmented vascular layer which prevents scattering of light. The front part of this layer is made up of ciliary muscle and the iris. The iris is the colored part of the eye. The pupil is the hole in the center of the iris, and contraction of the iris muscle dilates and constricts the pupil. So as you can see here, we have the pupil, which is the black part of your eye, which can dilate and constrict in given circumstances. The iris, which is the color of your eye, which can be blue, brown, hazel, or green. We have the sclera, which is the white part of the eye. And then we have the superior eyelids and the inferior eyelids. We also have the criminal carbuncle and the medial angle over here in the corner. So the eye has several different layers. The retina is the innermost layer of the eye, which contains rods for night vision and cones for color receptors and for day vision. The conjunctiva is a mucous membrane covering the front surface of the sclera and the lining of the eye. The lens is a transparent body behind the pupil which focuses light rays on the retina. Here is a picture of the components of the eye, and as you can see here, the cornea is the outside layer of the eyeball, and we sometimes call this the window of the eye. We then have what's called the anterior chamber, and we call this the aqueous humor, which is very important when we're talking about the disease glaucoma, where the aqueous humor can build up, and that fluid can build up in this chamber and cause vision changes. And usually there's a buildup in that aqueous humor when this little duct here, where my pointer is either partially closed off or blocked off. We also then have the iris, which is the color of our eye, the pupil, which is the dark circle in the middle of the eye when we're looking at somebody's eye. We then have the lens in which the eye then passes through to the fovea, which is where the photoreceptors called rods and cones reside, and they detect the changes in the light and relay the information to bipolar neurons. So the rods are again night vision, and the cones are day vision and also account for our color vision. Bipolar cells relay information. Actually, I'll go to my next slide. Bipolar cells relay information to the ganglion cells. So we have our rods, which are more elongated. Our cones are quite a bit shorter and have sometimes more of a cone type shape, not quite. And these relay information to the photoreceptor cells, which then relay information to the bipolar cells, which then get relayed to the ganglion cells. The information eventually leaves the eye by way of the optic disc, which then turns into the optic nerve, which would be down over here. Rods and cones are not present on the optic disc area of the retina, which results in a blind spot in your visual field. So wherever that optic disc ends up being, you will then have a blind spot there and won't have the ability to translate the message and see that image. So when you're in the doctor's office, you oftentimes will have a physician look at your eye through an ophthalmoscope, which is seen here. And when we look into a person's eye through the ophthalmoscope, we will see what's called the retina. And over here on the right-hand side is what your retina will then look like. And when we're looking into the retina, we look for the optic disc, we look for the macula, the retinal vessels, we make sure everything is healthy. Oftentimes we will look for this in children, and what we're really looking for is if there's any types of abuse or abnormalities in the vision. Shaken baby syndrome can be easily identified by looking at the retina because there will be bruises or red dark blotches throughout the retina. Eye fluids. So we have two different types of eye fluids in the eye. We have the aqueous humor, which is the anterior chamber of the front of the lens, and then the vitreous humor, which is in the posterior cavity behind the lens. These fluids help maintain normal shape of the eyeball. They also refract or bend light rays in the way that helps us focus them on the retina. So it has two main purposes. The visual pathway of the eye, the innermost layer of the retina, contains rods and cones. Impulse travels from the rods and cones through the bipolar and ganglionic layers of the retina. The nerve impulse leaves the eye through the optic nerve. The point of exit is free of receptors and therefore is called the blind spot, and the visual interpretation occurs in the visual cortex of the cerebrum or the occipital lobe. So here you can see the nervous signal leaves the eye via the optic nerve on the posterior surface of the eyeball. The optic nerve enters the brain and travels to the visual cortex of the occipital lobe, which you can see here. It travels all along here to the visual cortex, where in this area, visual interpretation of the nerve impulses are generated by cones and rods of the retina, resulting in our vision and our ability to see.